Welcome back. 2.2 million people lost their jobs in the second quarter of this year. The economy contracted by 51% on an annualized basis. Now, that is one of the biggest contractions in comparison to countries around the world that have also been dealing with COVID-19. So if South Africa ever needed a great economic plan, it was now. And let's look at some of the expectations around that. Apparent leaked details have left some economists with saying much more is needed. And then, of course, there are many labour issues also relating to the midterm budget. Let's speak to labour analyst Mamokgethi Molopyane. She joins us now. Mamokgethi, thank you for being with us. Let's start with what Labour wants. COSATU, the Trade Union Federation, saying we should see a R1 trillion package here. And what I'd like to ask you is we always see this divide between unions who suggest we spend ourselves out of a crisis and sort of the more orthodox economists, maybe our finance minister as well, who think that we really have to worry about debt. We can't just spend. Don't spend, rather create the conditions for business to thrive. Will there ever be a real compromise, or are these sides just destined to be so far apart?
No, there will not be a real compromise. I know organized unions and the federations like COSATU would want a plan that is clear and very detailed about how recovery is going to be put about. But also, importantly, I think they would be focusing on trying to save as many jobs as possible. However, we know that is not likely going to happen because we have seen that at the moment, the South African economy is mimicking other emerging markets experience in terms of a sharp contraction and a decline in the GDP of up to 10% in 2020. We anticipate that even with that kind of a decline, of course, the unions will always look to what best serves their members. However, the reality is that it is simply not possible, and that is why I said a middle ground is always not going to be found, not with the kind of wiping out, so to speak, that has happened in the past 6 months.
There was a real attempt this time. There were talks with business labour, that happening in NEDLAC government, then it went to the ANC. Our earlier analyst said that, in fact, waters down everything. What we need here is clear leadership. And these sides are so far apart anyway. Do you agree?
Yes, they did. They fell apart. I mean, when you look at the plan that was tabled or put together, the points that were coming out of NEDLAC, they seem to be far removed from what the economy is capable of and what the policy mechanisms that are put in place are capable of. One of the challenges that the unions find themselves, particularly those affiliated with the ruling party, is that there's this assumption or the notion that it is possible to influence how plans such as the recovery plan is shaped internally. But often that doesn't happen. Eventually, ultimately, the final word in the alliance will always be the ANC, even though it is said it's a consultative process and they engage with all the alliance partnership. But the final word will always be that. And I think with the current administration of President Ramaphosa, the aim is to create a business-friendly environment, so to speak, that somehow could accelerate a recovery. But South Africa is not alone, isolated there. It is part of the global conditions that we find ourselves in. So recovery is going to be quite difficult. Moreover, when you look at the shape of our state-owned entities and the conditions that they are in, that is one of the main drawbacks in the economy, in the sense that it is siphoning. Many of the SMEs are siphoning the necessary resources from government and channeling them into themselves. And as such, how internal micro and macroeconomic plans are going to be shaped will determine the pace with which South Africa is recovering. I do not think it's going to be now. And that is going to always put government, this particular administration, at loggerheads with labor and workers and organizations representing workers, because they main objective is to save jobs, to see as many jobs as saved or to create jobs. But it is impossible and it is unlikely going to happen. In fact, we anticipate that in the next coming 8 to 12 months, the economy is still going to shed a significant amount of jobs.
You raise an interesting point. You say that labour unions want to create jobs. Some critics would say they don't want to create jobs, they just want to protect their members. And here, the wage bill is a huge issue. So government said there needed to be a freeze on the pay of government workers. COSATU said that was reneging on a 3-year agreement, and we know that government is trying to renege. But there is quite a big wage bill. This is often cited as a threat. And if those government workers don't take an increase, that means possibly more money to go somewhere else where it can, in fact, create jobs. Is it time for workers to be involved in some sort of social compact like that, or is that asking too much?
Well, it's not asking too much, but we know the reality of a social compact working in South Africa economy are not always good. It's not possible. The conditions do not allow it to happen. And I say this because, as I had said earlier, the South African economy tends to mimic most of emerging markets that perform strongly. Unfortunately, we are performing weaker, but also the dynamics that has brought the unions to the fore, particularly in the public sector, regarding their wages, is going to, without a doubt, be a hotly contested argument between public sector unions, by the way, that have become dominant inside a federation like COSATU compared to private sector unions. And I do not think, even though government is saying we cannot afford to increase wages as the employer, the unions are going to accept that. So that already is a feature that will only take a spark for it to light up. Furthermore, the expanded public works program, I do not see government carrying on with it. That was the one area which government could have created jobs. And I do not see that happening because of the kind of budget constraints that they find themselves in. And if government assumes that it's going to spend its way out of a stagnating economy through infrastructure investment, that also hinges on how the global economy is doing and how companies and the recovery or overall of the economy is doing. So it's going to be a tricky time to think that government can lead talks or efforts of creating jobs. That part will always fall to the private sector. Unfortunately, the private sector in these conditions are going to say, well, we are squeezed tight by the pandemic and we are unable to create jobs. By the way, even before the pandemic, the private sector or business was not creating jobs as anticipated because the economy before the pandemic was in a recession, had severely stagnated. So it's going to be quite a difficult task to bootstrap the economy, so to speak, from the side of government. It is going to, as you say, need social cohesion from both the private sector and government working together. And by that I mean government enabling an environment that allows the private sector to create jobs. But it's also the reality that the private sector in South Africa has, for the past 7 years, been lagging behind in creating jobs. Moreover, when you look at the when you look at it relative to other countries that are in the same position. So it's quite a difficult period at the moment, and I do not see how that economic recovery plan led by government, even when using policy mechanism, is going to somehow stimulate the economy.
All right, so you're painting a picture of really an impossible task to find money where there is none. Maybe that's why we're seeing the midterm budget being delayed, the Treasury sort of scrounging around. What happens? You said it just takes a spark now, and we've already seen industrial action over this wage issue. Government workers want an increase. What if Tito Mboweni stands up in 2 weeks' time and says there will be a freeze on government wages? Where will that all lead to?
It will lead to talks within the alliance partners starting, and probably I do not even anticipate that the minister would say that if that was to happen, obviously there would be a serious gathering within the alliance, and consulting SABC would argue that. But then we must always remember of the changing power, the balance power that has changed within the alliance, and perhaps that might embolden the Minister of Finance to say, well, actually, it's time we froze spending and increase on wages based on the position that is assumed of the Federation that has become very weakened in its negotiating and bargaining and engagements within the alliance, and that alone can play to the ruling party's favor. However, I do not think at this time, given the internal politics that are playing out within the ANC and within the alliance, they would want to ostracize, so to speak, an alliance partner, however weakened that partner may appear, because it might spiral out more. The reality is that South Africa is struggling to catch up and recover quicker because we have had a recession and an economic downturn that has extended beyond almost to the point of breaking point, and a public sector wage that has increased relative to the revenue that government has generated, but also a government spending that in reality cannot be explained. Why has it grown up, increased so much? Yeah. And that has put constraints in. It leaves little room to navigate in terms of how is South Africa going to resuscitate its economy using policy mechanisms, so to speak.
Right. We have to leave it there, Mamokgethi, but thank you so much for your analysis as always. All will be revealed tomorrow, but still the wage issue, economic and political hot potato. That was Labour analyst Mamokgethi Molopyane. Now, with 20 days to go before the hotly contested U.S. election, do join us after 8 o'clock tonight. We cross to New York for the latest from our correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Peace. Let's take a short break.